You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Welcome to the fourth story for the month of November 2025, issue 230. I hope that this podcast finds you well, as always, or as well as can be. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to sit down and listen to another story, be a part of another world, meet new characters, and for your support. We cannot do this without you. Please go to patreon.com/Clarkesworld or clarksworldcitizens.com or chuck a few bucks our way via a donation, or go to the website to see how you can support us even further. And if you already are, and if you already have, thank you. You allow us to keep doing what we so love. Our story is titled Trees at Night and is by Ramiro Sanchiz, translated by Sue Burke. Ramiro Sanchiz is a Uruguayan writer and translator, author of more than 20 novels, none of them yet translated to English. He has also published book-length essays about the Matrix tetralogy and David Bowie's music, as well as short pieces on posthumanism, accelerationism, and speculative realism. His short stories have been published in magazines and anthologies such as El Tercer Mundo, Después del Sol, Cabezas en la Ventana, Xenomorphica Magazine, and Paradoxa, among many others. His work can be described as a macro novel about the multiple alternative lives of a single protagonist, Federico Stahl. He lives in Montevideo with his wife and 2 daughters and collects CDs, vinyls, Pokemon figures, and old computers. My translator, Sue Burke, is the author of the science fiction novels Semiosis, Interference, Usurpation, Immunity Index, and Dual Memory. In addition, she's published short stories, poetry, journalism, and essays. She's also a translator, working from Spanish to English. She's currently in Chicago, but had the pleasure of living in Spain from 2000 to 2016. And if you like what you hear, Sue has a story here in Clarkesworld titled Who Won the Battle of Arzia Mons? So, my dear listener, I hope that you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. I learned later that his name was Federico. He'd arrived too exhausted from the trip, and presumably from the illness, to explore the grounds that first day. Later in the week, when he came to the library, where I worked, he had just completed his first tour: the park, the sports field, the monument to the leaders of the revolution, the murals, and most of the main building. He looked shrunken, somber, hollow-eyed, and yet there was a composure about him, too grave for his age, that spoke of the solemn, melancholy temperament I'd often seen in those marked by the illness. He said he wanted to know if he could talk to me, if his words would harm me, or if, even worse, be contagious. I told him right away they wouldn't, and with an odd kind of happiness or relief, which seemed to widen his eyes, giving them a rounder, childlike shape. He politely asked me for history books after explaining he had already read about the grotto and the fountain, but the books available on Earth were short on details. I lent him the ones I knew were simplest, but I made the mistake of telling him they weren't for children. This bothered him, as if I were patronizing him, and he let me know it. The next day he returned the first book. I realized he had read it fast to show me his speed or concentration and prove he was an intelligent child, and he liked it when his skills were recognized. In cases like that, they say treatment for the illness is complex with little chance for success. In addition, the fact that he had been brought to Castorp at such a young age was a sign his case was especially difficult. I recall thinking, I hope he gets well, already developing a connection with the boy. And it was at that moment when he asked me about my life, like an empathic resonance. "What happened to bring you here?" he said, surprisingly sincere. And he could have equally meant here, the library, as in here, the planet. Or a third option I didn't want to consider, but he was a child after all, and I imagined him being raised in a world where everything I had seen in the last 20 years amounted to no more than a distant rumor, or something almost like fiction. He could just as well have asked how someone became a unicorn caretaker or a dragon breeder. I told him I was almost 55 years old and had spent the last 30 years on Castorp. He worked out the math in his mind. 1958. But that was before the sanatorium, he said. Yes. Very good, I said, as if I were speaking to a baby who had begun to recognize familiar objects or faces. And that was the first time. I saw him smile. Oh, of course, I continued. I worked on a lot of things before the sanatorium was built. I was a radio operator, then a systems manager, then a technical foreman for the construction of the port, and I had an accident there. Nothing serious, really, but I lost my accreditation and wound up looking for work at the sanatorium. The rest leads to where you found me. I've been the sanatorium's librarian since 1978. The year I was born, he added. Yes. 10 years. So, is it very hard to operate the jumper in the pit, he asked, simply to ask about something, anything, I thought. No. Now they use computers as I understand it, but when I learned how, it was all very mechanical. We barely used more than brute force. He fell silent. I looked at him and wordlessly tried to let him know he could tell me. Well, I've been ill for less than a year, he promptly said. I came upon a vestige at Stone Point, which is a place. But on Earth, where did you live? I was born in Spain. My parents were diplomats in Hiral's second administration. We moved to Moscow when I was 15 years old. Then I studied the jumper and got my degree. You must have been one of the first. Class of 1957, the second one. I didn't qualify for Castor picks, but it was enough to make the trip a year later as a technician. He nodded and coughed. I'd like to get another book, more difficult this time. I took the general history of Castor from a shelf and gave it to him with my good wishes. He left happily, hugging the thick tome. That week, I was scheduled for 3 free days and planned to spend the first day at Colony 1. I needed to finish up some paperwork at the party office, but I knew it would take little more than an hour, so I had planned to see a kino, eat at a nice restaurant, stroll along the coast, and visit the bookstores to see what was new. I got back to the sanatorium early that night, tired from the trip and eager to get some sleep. I got up the next day after 10. Soon I felt bored with no idea of what to do, but also felt the intuition that sometimes overwhelms me, signaling an especially strong connection with a patient at the sanatorium. When that happens, at first, I don't know how we'll communicate or how to make the link, beyond a kind of nebulous empathy. But soon, it becomes clearer. So as I made coffee and paced through the house, I began to imagine what Federico was feeling at that moment. Without much more thought, I went down to the lake. There he was, sitting on the damp ground, playing with a shovel and a pile of dry leaves. It was easy, before talking to him, to put myself in his place and see, or try to see, the buildings and the landscape from the point of view of someone whose memory was unburdened by 30 years of experience. Through Federico's eyes, then, I sensed the strength of the great trees that covered the knoll all the way down to the lake and hid the sanatorium behind their leafy crowns. With his ears, I heard the babble of the water and the distant hum of the machines in the basement. I felt the boy sweep his eyes over the wide, muddy stairways with their hammers and sickles, or over the slow, stagnant water. I thought about the damp, leafy darkness of the large wall, about the voluminous and perhaps slightly obscene bodies of the sleeping giants, and the mildew stains, the lichen, the vines, the insects that swarmed above the still waters, and the smell of aquatic and plant life. It wasn't all new. Some of it was familiar, normal for the summer heat, the warm, decomposing vegetation, the fine sand nearby. But soon I found myself wondering about what the child had seen and the intensity of the encounter. He had said a vestige, but perhaps something more powerful that had caused the illness in him. We talked for a while sitting on the sand. He had been studying the murals, he said, and had tried to copy them in a notebook. His sketches were clumsy, and for some reason this surprised me, as if I had assumed he would be able to draw well. But the tractors and chimneys were recognizable, the famous scene painted by Goncharova of the Tunguska event, the opening of the first pit, the release of the dragon and the whale, and the Vernadsky mission. Then he asked me if I had children. And I told him I did, but both of them lived with their mother in the Soviet North. He wanted to know if I visited them. Well, sometimes I do, I told him. And he fell silent. Perhaps he, too, was trying to put himself in someone else's place. Then I asked him if he liked the sanatorium, if he had already found his favorite place. And he had. We were there. Why? I asked, adding that it wasn't a common choice because, after all, we were behind the most important parts of the sanatorium, and here the buildings were unkept and faced a stagnant, unlovely lake. He pointed to the stairway. I want to see this area up close just because of that. Because it's the least kept up. All the rest has been renovated, right? I don't know if I'd call it renovated, I told him. But it's true that here, time seems to feel different. But I don't know how to understand it. No one understands it, Federico. But there are theories and interpretations. Humans reached Castorp in 1938 in the second Soviet post-Tunguska wave. Then they began to build the colony and then the Soviets, and sometime around then the sanatorium. I read it in the book you lent me. Yes, the sanatorium in 1973. It opened that year, but the entire building as you see it now was finished only 8 years ago. What happened? Yes, I read that too. The foundation was already... it was in ruins. Exactly. Ruins like that were everywhere on the planet. In the Soviet. In the colonies. Well, that's what I don't understand. How were there human ruins on a planet that had just been discovered? Well, not only that, they were 3,000 years old, according to some estimates. Some say older. How? He paused and he seemed to try to smile. Don't tell me. I read it in the book. It's just that... The general history is an old book, almost 10 years old. Since then, nothing really important has been discovered, but there are more hypotheses. For one thing, physicists have reached a conclusion. To travel from Earth to Castorp by the space-time distortion of the pit involves advancing thousands of years into the future. In those thousands of years, other humans must have come here by other means that we haven't discovered yet, and built their cities and then disappeared. We don't know why. Some say these travelers fled from the whale, the dragon, and the serpent, or from their vestiges. Because at the time, still in the future for us, they woke up and moved as they did in their early years on Earth. Others say that here is where they found the cure for the illness in the fountain. And others think that the whale, the dragon, the serpent, and the hive also come from the future, and they came out of the pit in Tunguska looking for a way back home. But what we know for sure is this. The humans who came here left these ruins. That's why the archaeologists are searching so hard in the ruins of Colony 3. There, they say, they might find the plans for the means that brought the humans here without moving through time. But if I go into the pit and go back to Earth, I don't go to the future. Don't say if I go, say when I go. And you really will go back to Earth, and there you'll have been gone only as much time as the weeks or months that it takes to cure you here. Well, that's what I don't understand. That's what no one understands, I told him. I spent almost my entire third free day cleaning my house and putting my papers in order. That night I called the sanatorium to ask about Federico. Sadly, what they told me confirmed my suspicions. His case was in fact very serious. He had encountered a vestige of one of the creatures. In his country, I knew they called them the altars, which wasn't clear. In fact, the medical team still hadn't decided what to do beyond the basic preliminary treatments, because until they could determine if it involved a vestige of the whale or the serpent, the dragon was ruled out naturally. They couldn't decide on the specific medications. I'm no expert, of course, but his sad, serious eyes, the tone of voice that had begun to consume itself, and the preoccupation with time all seemed to lean rather clearly toward contamination by the whale. In my experience, the patients who became infected by the serpent burn with an unquenchable passion that leads them to self-medicate and experiment with drugs and therapeutic interventions, and in the worst cases, self-inflicted violence. Those patients definitely don't last long and have the fewest chances to be accepted by the fountain, or, worse, it's horrible when it happens, of being precisely reconstituted. The ones affected by the whale, on the other hand, maintain a human chronosis, and their biggest problem is mid to long term. The next day I went back to work less than 10 minutes after the library opened. Federico came to return the books, saying that now he needed one more specific about the illness. You need to be a little careful with that. It's not good to know too much. But it won't hurt me either, will it? I didn't answer. I checked to see if we had a copy of the comprehensive manual, and when I saw that one was still available, I told him he could take it out. I didn't consider The Natural History of the Serpent by Yefremov, because the edition was so old. It used the now outdated generic name of the creatures and Cyrillic characters, and I made a mental note to order a new edition. As for Federico, I thought he would enjoy wandering among the shelves to find it. Smiling, he went to look for the book and returned almost immediately. I'm impressed. I think I'm going to have to hire you, I told him, and his face became flushed. Did they tell you I'm going to be here for a long time? Oh, there's no way to know. Sometimes longer is better. Sometimes patients are cured right away and they can leave. Were you ever in the grotto? As usual, the question stopped me. I had never found a way to answer it. Everyone with the illness asked me that sooner or later, except, of course, the ones with no interest in the library and books, but those were few. And I never reacted fast enough. No, never. From a distance. That's all. But sometime, someone must have told you what they saw. Well, yes, they did, of course. Federico must have noticed my relief. But it isn't easy to explain, and even harder to understand if you haven't had the illness. It's as if you were to tell me what you saw when you encountered the vestige. He answered right away, as if he had been waiting for the question. Trees. I don't know how many. Sometimes I remember 3, sometimes 5. 1 closer, 2 farther away. And everything is dark like night, and they aren't really trees. Sometimes it's one thing that looks like 5 trees or 3 trees. They're floating with their roots on one side and their branches on the other, but they move like tentacles. And sometimes they look like cables, too. You told that to the doctors, I imagine. Who heads up your team? Alina? No, Inessa. Inessa Nikolaevna. Inessa Nikolaevna Sidorova. Russian names are complicated, aren't they? I tried to tell it all kinds of ways, and it always comes out the same. They ask me if I'm dreaming, if I can remember it whenever I want, if I remember it different sometimes. And I say yes to everything, because sometimes I am closer to the trees or the tree, but it's always night. May I ask you something else? He nodded. Beside the trees, what do you remember? How you got there? How you got back home? The boy studied me as if his story were written on my face and he just had to read it back carefully. The only thing I know is that I walked back to town and then to my house, thinking that I was a ghost. And I was going to talk to my grandparents and they wouldn't see me and I'd have to shout at them. But sometimes I think this is what I dreamed that first night, that we had gone down to the beach with my grandfather and father were fishing by lamplight. Do you know what that is? Yes, I think so. It's fishing at night, right? You take a light that attracts the fish, and you have to catch them with a little pot or butterfly net, or if you have it, a fishing net. I never liked fishing by lamplight. The sea at night scares me. He paused. I thought about how sometimes children with the illness make up stories, and they let a deeper truth seep into their story. And eventually they themselves understand what they're saying between the lines. That's when they stop talking. After that, I remember realizing I was contagious to my friend. And that was when they isolated me, and then they decided I'd come here. That night, I tried to mentally reconstruct Federico's vision of the trees, very common among those who suffer contact with the whale or the hive. If sometimes they see more than 3, according to what I've read in the comprehensive manual, that could be considered evidence of the hive, because those who fall under the influence of the whale usually see a single immense shape with thousands of eyes that covers either the entire sky or the earth, like a sea. Seeing 5 would undoubtedly suggest the hive, so I feared that the medical team and Inessa Nikolaevna Sidorova was known for her habit of accelerating the process, might decide to take him to the grotto soon. But something else kept bothering me. The ghostly return home, along with the idea that he would have to shout to make himself heard. That is, Federico considered himself invisible, a presence that could only take form through sound. The next day, Federico didn't come to the library. In the afternoon, I called the sanatorium and learned that his descent into the grotto had been scheduled for Thursday. Barely 2 more days, then. I also learned he had been given a preliminary dose of the activator and had not reacted entirely well. Something hadn't met the models and predictions, but other than that, the boy was stable and sleeping. The day wasn't especially difficult or busy. I passed the time reading a novel and shelving the latest acquisitions, and I closed a little earlier than usual. I ate a late dinner of salad, rice, and some fruit, and left to stroll along the shoreline. It was unusually warm for springtime on the continent, and I thought about my daughters and the days in the Soviet North, remote, frigid, and luminous. Almost 4 years had gone by, I thought, and suddenly it was easy to feel guilty about not having told Federico the truth. But how could I make him begin to understand? Better to let him ask on his own if we happened to talk again during the few remaining days. All of a sudden, as if the scene had forced itself into my mind and feelings, growing higher and brighter, I imagined him as I approached the place where he knew he would find me, where he could tell me he had seen them. He had managed to speak to them, and he brought back their message. But the dream state quickly dissolved, and all that remained was fear and an echo of the dream he had told me about the boy, one or many, who returns to his house as a ghost, shouting, unheard. Besides, there was no way to know what would happen if Federico would accept the weave of voices or would come back mute, an unsuccessful return. Then I thought about the grotto. I had heard that some tourists, or rather, some parents incapable of resigning themselves to what everyone understood and everyone, or almost everyone, accepted and never spoke of, hired stalkers. Purportedly expert guides who would bring them as close as possible to take photos and then return, anguished and nauseated. And I realized that for some reason they fired me at the sanatorium. I would no doubt wind up like that, earning a little cash by recounting again and again the story of the ruins, the theories about the origin of the illness, and the discovery of the grotto and its fountain. Or would I take myself seriously and do the right thing? In that case, naturally, I would have to be the first to do what everyone thought was impossible, and it would surely kill me. Perhaps there was nothing worse than being a librarian in a sanatorium, or perhaps truly there was no comparison, and we did what we had to do at all times according to what life had in store for us, leading us here or there, making us leap, fall, and use whatever firepower we had on hand, and when the time came, die. But I thought again and again about Federico's dream as if the answer were hidden there, not only for the boy's case, but especially for mine. To return as a ghost, shouting to be heard without a body, speaking from the other side. I decided to ask him a question that I believe the doctors would not think of asking. I only had to wait for him to come and see me if he was able to visit one more time before he descended into the grotto. And he did. He came on Wednesday, very happy and eager to read more. He left the comprehensive manual on the counter and asked for something more recent. There isn't anything like that, I told him, at least nothing to loan. But then, where can I find the theories? On magazines and journals, but most of them are technical, and I don't know if you'll understand much. I can't understand them myself. Let me try, he said, and soon he was paging through last month's Cosmism and Castorp. Lots of graphs and equations? I asked. He didn't answer. Well, why don't you sit down? If it seems too hard, you can give it back and we'll find something else. He took one of the desks next to the microfiche and the table with 2 microcomputers and their screens. After a while, I sat down next to him. How's it going? Fine. I skipped the technical parts, like you said. Can I ask you something? He put down the magazine. Sure. You told me the other day that one of your recurring memories about contact with the vestige was returning home and feeling like a ghost, and you had to shout at your grandparents to be heard. Yes. Sometimes they had gone fishing by lamplight, and I went down to the beach and called them, but they didn't hear me. And in this picture, or this memory, whichever, did you see yourself? It seemed to me that something congealed or crystallized in the whites of his eyes. Sometimes. Yes, he said, surprised. How did you know? Have you told the doctors this? No, because I don't really know. It might not be me. Sometimes I think it can't be me. I see myself, but I know it can't be me. But you recognize yourself. I know it's a boy who looks like me, like a copy, but I know this is impossible too. And why aren't you yourself? I don't know. It's like just now you asked me and made me think. I think about what I remember, but I didn't always do that. Maybe it isn't me. It's other eyes, a face more. I don't know. Stupid? It's like there was always something to figure out, more to do, something I hadn't thought about. He kept looking at me, surprised. But I don't know how you know something I didn't tell you and haven't told anyone. Luck? Intuition? It doesn't matter. I always talk to people who come to the sanatorium, and some of them tell me things. And sometimes they tell me even more than they thought they did. He smiled, relieved. I must have told you more than I thought I did then. Probably. Can I take this magazine? Sure. And take one from the month before, too, because if you skip all the equations, you won't have much to read. Tomorrow, they're taking me to the grotto. Well, you could return them to me yourself, then, before you go back to Earth. He smiled. I hope so. He paused, uncertain, then said, Look, I know that you didn't tell me the truth. I know the story of your girls and how you and your wife came with them to the sanatorium, and they were cured in the fountain. How did you know this? I asked coldly. People told me. If you want, I can tell you who. I shook my head. Well, that's fine, he continued. I understand. I understand why you have to have a story like that. I understand why you tell it to the people you talk to when they've just arrived at the sanatorium. And you don't really know how long they're going to be here or what's going to happen to them. I suppose people leave sooner or later, like your girls or your family. And that's fine. You have to try everything. And I haven't told you the whole truth either. For a moment, I was afraid that his medication was wearing off, and perhaps briefly the illness was affecting what he had said. I cleared my throat. You haven't? No. In the dream, or what I remember of it, for example, sometimes I feel that my grandmother sees me or knows that I'm there on the walls of the house, like a butterfly or bat or something bigger, like the house or part of the house, the chimney maybe? I don't know if she hears me, but I think she knows. And if I want, I could talk to her because she's going to hear something, maybe taps, scratching, and this is all that's left. I don't know why my grandfather doesn't know, or my parents. It's like they've left, and this is why I just told you that people leave. Doesn't it seem like that to you? My grandmother knows more than that. Why her, I don't know, but I suppose she also knows that the other one isn't me. And it's just something like me that We're two things, one on one side and one on the other. There. He paused. I suppose that now you really don't understand anything because I'm not saying it right. The only thing that bothers me is that you've kept this a secret from the doctors. I think they should have figured it out for themselves. They're doctors, after all. You figured it out and you're a librarian. He waved goodbye and he left, and the look in his eyes seemed to tell me he knew we wouldn't see each other again. I concentrated on trying to evoke the dream state that had overcome me earlier, involuntary, like all real dreams, like all important ones, and barely succeeded. A ghost of Federico in the sanatorium grounds, reflecting the light of the full moon that evoked a few sparks of silver among the trees and the Soviet flags. The next day, he went down to the grotto and was absorbed by the waters of the fountain. I knew when it would happen, and I remember feeling uneasy and anxious. Would what he saw, I thought, be the same as when they took my daughters there? What would he dream? What would the drugs in the fountain make him see? They say that everyone with the illness who goes down into the grotto has a central vision. Some take it upon themselves to tell it again and again to everyone. Others, like Federico, become withdrawn and confused. But they can glimpse it because it's always more powerful than they are. Also, it's always what winds up consuming them. I supposed, then, that Federico saw his trees one more time, and perhaps there, precisely there, he understood why in his recurring dream he went back home as a ghost. The sadness of that idea overwhelmed me, and I had to hide my tears from the library patrons. It was as if low, slow, sad music came from everywhere with slight variations amid long monotony, the monotony inherent in the way the things of the universe are alike in their sadness. But more than that, the fact that we can do nothing about it. It was, I suppose, a sadness that Federico Stahl carried within him, that the illness had pulled from his flesh, and that sadness enveloped and flickered around him, interconnecting him with everything that surrounded him, the sadness and the clarity he had been shown by the vestige of the hive or the whale. One night, months after arriving at the sanatorium, our case wasn't as severe as Federico's. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to find my younger daughter sitting in her cot, watching the sleeping body of her sister, and perhaps her mother and me. I think she didn't notice I was watching her, or if she did, it made no difference. Soon she lay down again and went back to sleep. But at that moment, in the darkness barely broken by the lights from the hallway that filtered in through the cracks in the door, her eyes absorbed the complete sadness of the world, just like Federico's. Looking at them, I felt I understood everything, what those two had seen when they touched the vestige. In her case, it was a microform of the dragon. What had moved them to the profound sadness of the illness, and above all, what had brought my daughter to this night when, alone in her cot, she had comprehended the truth. She had comprehended precisely that in the end, nothing was worth the suffering, but nothing else was required to believe it was our own. And like my daughters, Federico, this fresh replica of Federico, like those beautiful replicas of my daughters, the same ones I would soon be powerless to endure, with pallid skin and eyes bigger but still closed, crawled out of the grotto, trembling in the second birth of those who are ill and who come to Castor and are cured at the sanatorium. They no doubt took him as they had taken my daughters, wrapped in towels and gowns, washed and jolted with even more drugs, down to the central chamber of the sanatorium, to the basement, to the emergence of the secret heart of the ruins, which no one can see who has not passed through the fountain. There, the weave of voices passed through him and reshaped him, gave him his name, taught him the words to say to us to show that he was one of us, a human being, a son, a child of the earth, and to show that a little more than a week had passed on a planet remote in time and space, so he could return to his home in the final days of 1989. Then, as I could not, his parents would be convinced that their son himself was there, that he spent 2 nights in the grotto and left at least healthy, weak, shaken by the experience but definitely cured, able to speak to them without fear of contagion, to speak of things using their safe and secure names. The terror had passed, and they could go home. Their son had returned, they would believe, maybe even decide right away, and read in those bigger eyes, still a little red, that he needn't ask himself more questions, only simply return. Federico spent a few days in observation, and right after they declared him fit to be discharged, they took him to the colony, and from there to the Soviet, where they crossed the pit in the jumper. Sometimes I see them. It's true. If they are children, their small bodies are put in large gray coats to relieve the cold of the grotto, which still afflicts them. Large hats cover their ears, scarves are wrapped around their necks and much of their faces, and they are carried in their mother's embrace. If they are adults, they wear the same warm clothing, but they move in anxious haste as well as solitude, still confused. They move tentatively, marked by fear. The world must seem new to them, for no matter how well the words have inhabited them, something in their bodies knows. I wonder if they will dream later like Federico, that they return to a place where in some way they already are. Weeks went by. No new patients entered the sanatorium, and no more were taken down to the grotto. The news from Earth said little about the movements of the dragon and the whale, but they did talk about 2 sightings of the hive and a pair of vestiges of the serpent nestled in a glacier. One day the doctors decided to hold a picnic at the lake in the same place where Federico and I had talked near the stairway, within the hum of the machines, and I thought about spending a night at the colony and getting drunk, about leaving the sanatorium forever, and finally becoming a stalker. But to do that, I'd need to go down. One morning I woke up certain it was time to try. I spent the day repairing a couple of damaged books, working at that consuming task slowly and meticulously, and when night fell, I began to prepare myself. Then, as carefully as ever, I went down next to the grotto. The sanatorium rose far away, its sight mostly blocked by trees. The sun had already set, and a globular cluster of stars sparkled in the sky to remind all us humans that we were not on Earth, and, in fact, we did not know where we were. Under their light, everything seemed metallic, ashen, and above all, old. An incomprehensible age emanated from the mouth of the grotto and scattered itself, star by star, through the length and breadth of the moonless sky. I didn't dare go farther in than I had on other occasions. My years on Castor had given me some resistance, but without the protection that the nurses wear when they take patients to the fountain, I would not survive more than a few minutes. And I tried to see, fleetingly, spurred again by a singular hope, to be able to detect some movement, some indication of a presence. They are there, after all, like the ghostly images that they say follow the doctors and nurses after a sufficient number of descents. And I want to seek them. I want to truly be able to enter, to follow the meanders of the grotto down to the waters of the fountain, and there, on the walls around it, see all the children and all those who were ill, the real ones, not the copies that the grotto creates, who make their way toward the light of day like fish from the abyss. To see those who made their descent, all their bodies fused into a single mass about which so much has been said, or rather whispered, the newest ones still with human faces, their eyes closed, their mouths, their hands stretched toward the light, and the oldest ones now unrecognizable, wrapped into a spiral of who knows what. I will see Federico then. I will see so many patients who had passed through the library and had told me their visions. I will see my daughters there in the depths behind everything. And like that other night, I will read the sadness of the world in their eyes, and will finally learn what lies beyond the world. What those eyes, no longer human, see, and no longer name with these useless words. This story was originally published in Spanish in Ruido Blanco, number 9, 2021. What are your thoughts on the story? You can send me an email. I'm kate@clarksworldmagazine.com. You can also follow me over at twitch.tv/catercakes, where I stream occasionally, talk about publishing, talk about all the things. And we have a few more stories coming to you for the rest of November. And then we go on to December with your ongoing support. So thank you again for listening, for checking a few bucks our way, for going to patreon.com/Clarkesworld. I hope you'll come back and listen, should you so choose. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you a very fond and hopefully very temporary farewell.